Dear friends of Renew Europe, good afternoon. We are here today with Mrs. Martina Dlabajová, Renew Europe MEP, in a conversation about Europe's small and medium-sized enterprises. Martina is the new Renew Europe coordinator for the Industry, Research and Energy Committee, the co-chair of SME Intergroup in the European Parliament, and the chair of the Renew Europe SME Taskforce. Let me say a couple of words about her. Martina is a politician, but despite this fact, she often says she will always be an entrepreneur at heart. At the age of 18, she went to study in Italy and later founded her first company while still at university. She then gradually expanded her business from Italy to the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Bulgaria. She was also the president of the Regional Chamber of Commerce in the Zlín region in the Czech Republic. In the European Parliament, Martina and her colleagues from Renew Europe established a permanent SME task force within the group. Their promise to all European SMEs is to always consider Commission proposals, legislation, and other EU actions through the SME lens, as well as prioritizing and promoting SMEs in policy work. Europe's small and medium-sized enterprises are everywhere around us. Around 24 million of them, they represent together up to 99% of all companies in the EU. They are responsible for the vast majority of new jobs over the years, and our societies rely on them massively. However, SMEs face specific challenges due to their size, like challenges in accessing finance, excessive red tape, and difficulty in benefiting from opportunities in the single market, or problems about the digital upskilling of their employees. SMEs are exhausted after a COVID-19 period full of lockdowns and now face the energy crisis, high inflation and consequences of the war in Ukraine. Renew Europe is fully aware of all these challenges and has fought to ensure progress in all the mentioned areas. Together with Martina and our distinguished guests who speak for SMEs, we will talk about these political efforts and victories today. Mrs. Dlabajová, this is the second year since the European Parliament held the so-called State of the SMEs Union in the plenary. It is a great thing and a huge success. Tell us, what is the purpose of the State of the SMEs Union? Where we go into details, tell me what has been discussed in this plenary, what has been achieved over the past year in the field of SMEs, and what the SMEs are still missing or desperately waiting for, and what is or was in focus this year for the debate.
Thank you, Juliana, and let me greet our Facebook and LinkedIn friends who are following this live. Well, to explain what the state of the SME Union is a very easy question. Or maybe would we wish it would become as a tradition. It is a crucial initiative for putting small entrepreneurs in the middle of the European debate, and I'm happy we have achieved it. Already twice, and hopefully it will be a tradition for next years. We put SMEs at the center of the EU agenda, in the middle of the plenary, which you know is the maximum top of the work of MEPs, the most followed expression of MEPs. So State of the SME Union is a closely watched debate among the EU institutions on the performance of SMEs and how to support them. It was an initiative of myself and other colleagues from Renew Europe. There are already unique examples of yearly debates in a plenary, such as energy or generally challenges of the European Union. We found the inspiration, of course, in the famous debate State of the Union, which is delivered by the President of the European Commission, and in the State of the Energy Union. Our aim now is that State of the SME Union happens regularly, on yearly basis, and stays on the agenda of the plenary. And of course, we don't want to only talk about SMEs. What we really want, we want to deliver. We want to know what has been done, what still needs to be done, and we want to make the European Commission accountable as well. That's why it is important that the State of the SME Union is happening, because it is public. All SMEs from all Europe can listen, every entrepreneur can watch it and get the picture of how things work or don't work. We, the European Parliament, and me personally, we want to be watchdogs of what is being done for SMEs. We really want the EU institutions to deliver what is needed. We need to fight for real changes, not only words. If you ask me what was already achieved and what we still need to do, what we still need to deliver for SMEs, well, it would be a long list. And I think themselves would tell us that there is still a lot to do. But no doubt that the task number one in this moment is how to help the companies exhausted already after the COVID-19, as you mentioned, that they need to overcome the energy crisis. If our commitment to SMEs was needed before the crisis, what I'm always saying, it now has become essential for their very survival. So we need to take every opportunity to help SMEs, regardless of whether they are super innovative and working on the latest technologies, or if they focus on traditional crafts. By the way, have you had a chance to see the Anwar report on European SMEs? Well, it's a very interesting document, and it indicates that after the hit of the pandemic, a positive trend of growth is projected to happen in 2022. According to this report, all SMEs are expected to grow in value of 7% roughly in 2022. It is predicted that there will be more new companies, and the micro ones are expected to perform better than the SME average. But there is no data about so-called miss bankruptcies that would have been caused by COVID. But what we know for sure is that the financial effort put forward, the EU funds, national government schemes, bank special guarantees on loans, has created a kind of comfort bubble, and it allowed companies to survive. Of course, that the projected growth is not the same along all sectors. There are some sectors which are really at risk. We know that SME vitality is foreseen for manufacturing, energy supply, water and waste management, transport and storage, and food and accommodation. In these sectors, SMEs are expected to increase employment more than large companies. What I really want to mention is that the current scenario and inflation and rising energy prices are projecting insecurity on all three mentioned areas. To sum up, more and more SMEs are now at risk of collapse due to the high energy costs. And I think we will talk about that more in detail. But all this in the same moment when we ask SMEs to accelerate their digitalization and sustainability strategies. So we are really asking them a lot. Now the current problem is how to pay the skyrocketing bills. And you were asking what we have been doing for SMEs concretely. Well, you mentioned already the Renew Europe Taskforce. I think this is a very good example how MEPs from Renew Europe group from different committees got together, and we, with all our knowledge and skills, looking from different perspectives, from different committees, we are able really to cover horizontally the support to SMEs. We are able to do common amendments in different committees, because this is not only about the committee which is dealing directly with SMEs like ITRE committee. This is about all committees. And of course, it may seem like a little small thing, but I think now it's more important than ever, because our key message that we want to deliver to small entrepreneurs is: we listen to you, we care about you, and therefore we will try to find concrete solution to your concrete problems. And maybe something which is really missing, and we need to repeat it: we are proud of you who are doing business. So this is something that we should do. And I can mention all the concrete things, but we can maybe leave it for later.
We can leave it for later. Let's listen now to the entrepreneurs' representatives. Mrs. Alena Mastantuono is the first to ask a question to Mrs. Dlabajová. Mrs. Mastantuono is a member of the European Economic and Social Committee, Employers Group. We are listening to your question.
First of all, thank you for the invitation and good afternoon. And I'm also representing Czech Chamber of Commerce in the committee, therefore I'm in the group of employers, and I can speak about on behalf of the companies. And I'm happy to see that we have in the European Parliament watchdogs like Martina Dlabajová. Well, it was said that the SMEs are very important, and at the same time they're facing several crises like pandemics and now energy crisis. And they also have to strive for the energy and digital transition. My issue is actually that how can we safeguard that that they still can compete globally, because European SMEs do not have equal footing when compared to their non-European counterparts, which benefits either from avoiding sanctions on Russia or from lower climate and environmental requirements. So my question is, how can the European institutions ensure that our SMEs can still compete at global level under the same conditions?
Mrs. Dlabajová, the floor is yours.
Well, not an easy question. Thank you, Alena, for this question. Well, I think there are so many things we need to do at the short term and at the long term. What I absolutely need to mention now, it's something like creating a shield for SMEs from energy crisis and inflation. This must be our top priority, because we are seeing it now every day, and SMEs are worried about what will be next month, what will be at the end of this year, and what will be tomorrow. Well, European Parliament is not sleeping. Last week in the plenary in Strasbourg, we adopted by a large majority a resolution on energy prices rising. I drafted personally the text as representative of the ITRE committee together with Econ colleagues. I must say we found very good compromise and strong signal coming from the European Parliament. But as you know, every resolution as such is a compromise, is a result of a compromise. And already starting with the compromise, we need to find another compromise with the European Council, with member states. So there are really concrete measures, and I think, again, we will come back to it more in detail. But what we really need to do to find a balance between the European support, the European measures, and the national measures. So what we are seeing already now, European level is creating some framework which needs to leave flexibility to member states to act where every member state needs to act. So this is my first point I wanted to mention. The second, we need to say no to unnecessary bureaucratic burdens, and even the burdens coming from sustainability sometimes. I am sure that you, and I am sure that Alena knows it, you already heard about so-called corporate sustainability due diligence. We are dealing with this every day, at the everyday basis in the Parliament, and the directive could be a real danger. And we want to make sure that any good ethical sustainability intent cannot go against competitiveness and the daily survival of businesses. So especially in times like now, when we need support and cutting red tapes, not vice versa. My third point I would like to mention is investing in competitiveness and innovation of European SMEs. So the fact that we are now in a crisis, in energy crisis, in inflation crisis, doesn't mean that we will stop investments. We need to invest. I already mentioned it so many times, and I will repeat it over and over, but I see the huge opportunities for fostering SMEs in Horizon Europe, for example. This unique EU program has a budget of 95.5 billion euros. I am very proud that during the final trialogue, we managed to add specific wording which helps innovative SMEs to get access to finance. And other opportunities for fostering SMEs innovation lie in the support of over 200 digital innovation hubs and industrial clusters. So they will be able really by 2030 to enable more than 90% of European SMEs to reach at least the basic level of digital intensity. So there are different instruments, and as Alena rightly pointed out, what is important to find a balance between big companies and small companies, to find a level playing field for small companies. And I would say that regarding SMEs, looking for balance is maybe one of the most important things.
Many, many things to consider when being a legislator in order to better the lives of entrepreneurs and SMEs. Our second question comes from Veronique Willems, Secretary General, SMEs United. Please, Mrs. Willems, ask your question.
Thank you, and also thank you for inviting me today to this discussion, and especially also, Martina, a very big thank you for the efforts you have made for putting the SME State of the Union on the agenda again in the European Parliament. You have our full support to continue this work. It's important to be able to shape Europe for SMEs. And I think with this initiative, you contribute a great deal. We will be presenting our SME barometer this Friday morning. And what is already clear is that SMEs are really struggling with the energy costs. And many SMEs across Europe decide to stop production or even have to close down completely. You were in charge of the joint resolution that the Parliament approved last week on the European Union's response to the increasing energy prices. And I wanted to know from you whether you are satisfied with the measures that Parliament Council have already put forward so far, and which other suggestions you would make to support SMEs.
Please.
Well, thank you, Veronique. We see what are the main issues bordering SMEs right now. We are still talking about energy prices and about energy crisis. Well, Veronique, it was not an easy task to draft and gather the support of the European Parliament for this resolution. We worked on it very hard. We managed it. The text was approved. But as I said, again and again, I see that sometimes the European Parliament is only about compromise, and sometimes the compromise is not making happy everybody. Sometimes it's not making happy anybody. This is the compromise. This is the definition of compromise. I am satisfied that we explored a lot of different solutions, a lot of different measures and support measures we can see for SMEs. We really had very deep and technical talks with colleagues. That was very important. If you really translate the measures in the final resolution, this is always a question mark, but now we will need to discuss this once again with the Council, with the Member States. So energy sector is extremely complex. Problems which are there are extremely complex, and answers we were looking for in the resolution are more complex than questions. I must assure you that during the work, I have paid great attention to ensure that the resolution addresses the issues of SMEs, and SMEs are very well reflected in the resolution. So as I already mentioned before, there must be two-level support for SMEs. And in this extremely difficult moment, it's even more difficult to find, let's say, the right proportionality between two levels, because the EU level is one thing and the national level is another thing. And you know it from the beginning of this crisis, Member States and Commission were always discussing who should be doing what. They are always discussing who should be doing what, but now even more. So we had very interesting debates on this personally with the Commissioner for Energy, Kadri Simpson, with the Vice President Executive of the Commission, Margaret Vestager, and I can imagine that from their perspective, it's not an easy task from the technical perspective of energy, and from the other side, from the competition rules and state aid rules, what the Madam Executive Vice President is responsible for. So on one side, we need the European answer, and I am always repeating it. We absolutely need the same answer like in COVID. We need to find the common European solution, because this is a common European problem. But on the other, and I think citizens and SMEs are expecting this from us, to find a common European answer. But the EU level must be flexible enough and must find the right flexibility to allow Member States to find the right support schemes and measures to their vulnerable households and SMEs in the same time. And I think that to allow this flexibility to Member States, it's not an easy task. So there must be some changes on state aid as well. We are discussing it. We realize that the European citizens and businesses, including, of course, the SMEs across different sectors of the economy, trust Europe to provide a common solution, as it did in case of COVID-19 crisis. I really believe that they trust Europe now, after the experience we had with COVID. And I am convinced that we learned the right lessons. And we are ready to deliver the necessary support and market predictability that we need in our daily lives. The EU must act together and united, while must give this flexibility. And Member States are doing a lot. I'm studying regularly myself the table of different measures in Member States, so some little bit less, some little bit more, but they are doing a lot. And they need to have this European framework. So I would stop here, Veronica. I would not go into many details because if we start to discuss progress on the decoupling of electricity prices from the price of gas or temporary wholesale and import price caps on joint procurement of energy sources, we will be here until tomorrow. So we are still in work in progress. We are discussing it, but I think that SMEs are well reflected in the debates and in our proposals we have on the table.
Great. SMEs trust EU. This is a very nice phrase. I wish our viewers and listeners would stick to it. SMEs trust EU. Third, but not least, Mr. Petri Vorio, Vice Chair of Business Europe Entrepreneurship and SME Committee, will address a question to Mrs. Dlabajová. Please, Mr. Vorio.
Good evening and greetings from Finland. I'm Vice Chair of Business Europe Entrepreneurship and SME Committee, and thank you for inviting me to join this live event with Ms. Dlabajová. And thank you also, Ms. Dlabajová, for your strong commitment in support of European SMEs. You have always been vocal on the need for better regulation for European SMEs. Well, EU legislation should indeed go through an SME lens, and it is crucial to have a proper assessment of the costs and benefits of European Commission proposals and to avoid unnecessary or disproportionate burdens on SMEs. And this is very much linked to the well-known SME test, a top priority for Business Europe, which became or has become even more crucial in today's very challenging economic environment, like we already talked about, energy crisis and impact on SMEs. While we support the SME test, we think also it is important to draw attention to weaknesses in its application. And this is why, together with two other associations, including SME United, that is present today, we are going to publish soon a joint report analyzing this application of the SME test by the Commission. Well, coming to the question, given your extensive experience in EU policymaking and also considering your entrepreneurial hat, what is your assessment of how the SME test is performed at EU level by the European Commission? And do you acknowledge any strong points of this tool and what should be improved in your view? And finally, going beyond the European Commission, how can the European Parliament support the process of better SME test implementation?
Thank you.
Thank you. It's my very favorite topic. Thank you. Greetings to Finland. Well, it's a very complex issue, but let me maybe first shortly explain what the SME test is, so our friends on Facebook and LinkedIn, they can get into it. This tool is a very crucial one. It analyzes the possible effects of EU legislation proposals on SMEs. In concrete terms, it does preliminary assessment of businesses likely to be affected. It includes consultations with SMEs and SME representative organizations, does measurements of the impact on SMEs, cost-benefit analyses, and uses of mitigating measures if appropriate. You are absolutely right that the European Commission is committed to a systematic and proportionate application of the SME test in its impact assessment. The updated SME test is presented in the Better Regulation Toolbox, which was revised in July 2017. Yes, July 2017. We are working still on better regulation in the European Parliament, but there are some really outdated rules still. So we see that the SME test has not been consistently applied in legislative proposals. So if you would like to know my simple answer, no, I am not convinced that Commission is using SME test at its best. And I think that it's a big mistake, because SMEs are less capable of influencing the evolution of the regulatory framework than bigger companies. And we see it in our everyday legislative life. The SMEs cannot analyze complex scenarios arising from legislation. Sometimes they just don't know what is on the table of European institutions. They cannot influence legislation from the beginning. So imagine an administrative burden still remains a major issue for SMEs. There are very interesting numbers, and this is really for me striking figure. On average, where a big company spends €1 per employee to comply with the regulatory duty, a medium-sized enterprise spends around €4, and a small business up to €10. This is a big difference. So what can help the situation? Three things I have in my mind. First, constant application to think small first principle by the European and by the national legislator, including the SME test, because this is not only about European level. This is about the national level as well. Not necessary. We need to exclude SMEs by legislation when this would entail losing opportunities, but give them some simplified requirements. So not excluding them by default, but giving them some possibility of simplified requirements. And then we need this kind of buffer periods, delay for them the application of new norms. So they need a little bit more time to gather knowledge and good practices. So we contributed as Renew Europe and me personally consistently to the report of the Parliament on better regulation, stressing that Commission should not only perform the SME test more systematically, but should also provide for mandatory SME tests to be performed in all legislative proposals, where this is of course applicable. So this test should clearly identify how simplification could be attained in terms of costs and benefits. And where possible, it should recommend formulate some additional recommendation to avoid unnecessary administrative or regulatory burdens for SMEs. And two more things. I think that we don't need only SME test before the legislation is coming to our tables, but we need ex post evaluations as well. And this is sometimes missing. So we need SME tests not only before, but even after legislation is already implemented. And my last point, the question was absolutely clear. What can European Parliament do to ask Commission to use more SME tests? We have to call for it in every occasion, always. In every report, as we did in a report of the Parliament on better regulation, but we have to do it vocally in the moment we can. And very good occasion was the State of the SME Union debate in the plenary, where I personally called for the Commission not to never ever propose any legislation without SME test. And this is something that we, as members of the Parliament, need to do. And by the way, I am very much looking forward to see the report of the stakeholders, to understand in detail and maybe with concrete examples, because of course we politicians, we need evidence, we need data, we need concrete examples to understand how the SME test is or is not applied. So I am looking forward for this report.
Yes, I know you are very demanding and exigent in applying this SME test. Let's hope that all your efforts will be crowned with success in every endeavor you take up. Thank you to all our guests who kindly contributed to the richness of the dialogue this evening. Back to us, as we heard today many times, SMEs are sometimes blocked in their effort to do business by what is called a bureaucratic red tape, with a metaphor that is actually very present and very concrete. You are striving to integrate in the European legislative environment the one-in, one-out principle, another very important principle in the SME ecosystem, political ecosystem, which was already mentioned a couple of times. What does this mean, the one-in, one-out principle?
Well, simply said, if an additional burden is coming, then at least one of the previous burdens should be eliminated. Mm-hmm. But it's not as simply as it looks. We, the Renew Europe, we are even going much further. We would love to see one in, two out. There is no other option. We really need to simplify the working environment for entrepreneurs. And I need to say this loud and clear, the work of policymakers cannot happen without a really close and open dialogue with stakeholders. So with SMEs themselves and, of course, organizations representing them. We need to look together and what the one in, one out really means. Because sometimes you should not have this one out something which was working well for companies, because there are, of course, some legislations which are working very well, which helped companies. So you have to look at it very closely. So it cannot be automatic, like something new is coming, so we just throw out the first thing we see. No, we need to be very careful, and we need for this this close dialogue with the stakeholders. So this is why I am really very grateful that we have it. We are really having this close dialogue, and I hope that these stakeholders and our SMEs found both in Renew Taskforce and in our personal activities we are doing as MEPs, they found good listeners.
Excellent. Actually, I should stress on this idea that Renew Europe listens to entrepreneurs, and is part of our endeavors and efforts, legislative efforts, communication efforts. We want to build a community of people that help and actually listen to entrepreneurs. This is our goal. One last question. The digital transition provides huge opportunities for SMEs, as we all know. You are the rapporteur for Renew Europe to Digital Decade Policy Program in 2030. Where exactly are these opportunities and how SMEs can get to them?
Juliana, the first thing which comes into my mind is the opportunities are everywhere. But of course, I worked personally as reporter on this path to the Digital Decade, the policy program for 2030, and it is a real opportunity. It sets EU-wide digital targets to be achieved by 2030, thanks to a joint effort by member states and the EU level, as well as through joint investments. So I see the Digital Decade program as a highly structured response to the challenges the EU faces in the race to the global digital leadership in the next 10 years and beyond, of course. And I really believe it can change a lot. And we are coming back to what was the question of Alena, the competitiveness of SMEs. So this is why Europe is trying to set these general targets and to go more into details. And to go more into the details, of course, there are goals as digital training and education, because digital skills are super important. They should be extended to the business environment, especially to micro enterprises and SMEs, to ensure effective digital transformation. But as you need on one side digital targets for SMEs, you need them as well for public administration, and you need them as well for citizens. So one without the other cannot achieve the general digital targets of Europe. As a rapporteur, I am very proud that the text of this Digital Decade policy program really reflects the solid involvement and attention for SMEs. We were thinking a lot about SMEs. I would almost say this is one of the programs which we really had in mind, our SMEs. I was impressed working on that with other shadow reporters, that everybody mentioned always as a first priority SMEs. So I think we are really on good track for SMEs, and we need to do even more, because we know already from our reports, from our data, our evidence, that 68% of large enterprises are actively working in digital environment, providing digital and ICT training for their personnel, while only 18% of SMEs do. So we really need, there is this huge problem we need to address, and I really hope that this cooperation between European level and again national level, and we manage to involve local level as well, this will help exactly the SMEs.
Excellent. Thank you, Martina. Dear friends, I hope our dialogue this afternoon on SMEs was enriching for entrepreneurs and for all those interested in improving their lives as well. Thank you for your attention. See you next time.